Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Ellen Krug. I'm the Executive Director of Call for Justice, an ABA award-winning program that helps connect low-income people with civil legal resources in the metropolitan area of Minneapolis and St. Paul. This is yet another one of our training sessions with United Way 211, all geared towards helping United Way 211 make targeted legal referrals so as to make it easier for people in legal need to connect with civil and sometimes criminal legal resources. We have a phenomenal program today with two speakers who are going to talk about what I call two ends of the spectrum. Well, we need to make it work somehow. So our first speaker is Denise O'Leary from the St. Paul Dispatch Center on 911, and a second speaker, Andrea Palumbo, who is from the Council on Crime and Justice. I'll introduce them both, and then what our sessions will work today is that Denise will talk about 911. When she's done, we'll break for a second, and then Andrea will talk about criminal expungements. So, are we ready to go? Our first speaker is Denise O'Leary, who has been working in dispatching for 30 years, having started as one of the early civilian employees in St. Paul Center, and I believe also one of the early women employees as well. She has been a telecommunicator, fire dispatcher, shift supervisor. She's managed St. Paul's Center, and since it consolidated with a number of other organizations, Denise has been the operations manager and then the training and quality assurance manager for the telecommunications center that runs 911 out of St. Paul and covers all cities in Ramsey County except for White Bear Lake. Please help me welcome Denise O'Leary.
All right, thank you. As Ellie said, I worked for St. Paul's Dispatch Center and now work for the Consolidated Ramsey County Emergency Communications Center, ECC we call it. We were established in 2007. The St. Paul Police Department and Fire Department had a dispatch center, Maplewood Police and Fire, White Bear Lake Police and Fire, and then the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office dispatched the other police and fire departments in the county. The St. Paul, Maplewood, and Ramsey County centers opted to consolidate. White Bear Lake continues to have its own separate center. So we dispatch every police and fire department in Ramsey County except White Bear Lake. We are a division of county government. We are not a part of the Sheriff's Department or any other departments within the county. So we function independently of any of the agencies that we dispatch for. We take about 1 million calls a year, and about 400,000 are dispatched. The rest, we get duplicate calls of some incidents, and we make referrals. So that's why every call we take doesn't necessarily result in somebody being dispatched. We are one of the larger dispatch centers in the Midwest. There's different ways that you can measure that, but we are one of the largest, if not the largest, in terms of the number of employees that we have and the number of calls that we dispatch. We have about 140 employees, and 120 or so of them are dispatchers and telecommunicators. The dispatchers and the telecommunicators are the ones that directly handle the calls for service. The rest of our staff are management, supervisors, and radio technicians and support people. We have two different types of dispatchers. We have law dispatchers who handle police calls, and we have fire dispatchers. They dispatch fire calls. They also dispatch medical calls in the cities where St. Paul Fire and Maplewood Fire respond as the ambulance service. And that would be St. Paul, Maplewood, and then St. Paul also responds in Falcon Heights and Lauderdale, which are the two suburbs immediately adjacent to the northwest corner of St. Paul. We do pre-arrival for medical calls where St. Paul Fire and Maplewood Fire respond for medical calls. We use what's called medical priority dispatch. This is just a convenient flip card that we can carry with us. It's a large card set that for a wide variety of medical problems has questions that we can ask to help determine who should respond. And it has instructions for things like CPR, childbirth, bleeding control. So if you were to get a call at 211 where somebody, say, misdialed when they meant to call 911, and they have a medical problem and you call us for them, and it seems like we're asking you a lot of questions, it's because there's a lot of questions involved with giving the pre-arrival instructions.
Everyone remember, Denise will take questions, so just ask
Anytime.
away if you've got anything, okay?
Okay. The telecommunicators are the people who answer the 911 and non-emergency calls. So within Ramsey County, if you call 911 or you call our non-emergency number, those are the folks that you'll be talking to. They also work in our data channel area, which is where we run motor vehicle queries, driver's license queries, warrant queries, and do other things to assist police officers. So we'll do things like calling tows if they need a referral phone call, if they need anything like that, we will take care of that and help them out that way. Because we are so large, we do sometimes operate differently than other dispatch centers do. So just to give you a little bit of idea, we're what's called a two-stage dispatch center. The telecommunicators, the call taking, and the dispatching are separate functions. A lot of agencies have one person doing both jobs. For instance, Minneapolis is moving towards having one person do both jobs, so you would answer the phones and you would dispatch. They're still sitting at separate consoles doing it separately. There are smaller agencies where the same person will take a phone call and talk on the radio. In terms of communicating with the police officers, you know, there are some advantages to that, but in a city of our size with all of the personnel we have and all of the radio channels we have, that isn't very practical. There are a lot of questions that we ask of people, and there's sometimes maybe some things that we do for people that not necessarily every dispatch center does. Sometimes there's only one person working. There are centers that do, for instance, the medical pre-arrival, but it can be difficult to do if you are trying to talk to someone on the phone and dispatch paramedics and dispatch the fire department if they respond and dispatch police. So they may only use the pre-arrival if they need to, say, give CPR instructions.
Can you explain what medical pre-arrival is?
That's the kind of industry term for giving things like CPR instructions to people. It's called pre-arrival instructions because it's given before the paramedics get to the scene. And we have a lot of different types of instructions that we can give. We have some that are standard in every call and some that are really specialized to the call.
So that would mean that your dispatcher is on the phone, stays on the phone with the person who's in medical need until the emergency responders get there?
Right. We don't do that with every call. If it's something relatively minor, like someone slips and falls, we probably would not stay on the phone in that situation. But we would for some of the more serious ones. For instance, with childbirth, we have instructions to help prepare a mother who hasn't given birth yet. We have instructions on how to care for the baby if the baby is born while we're on the phone, or if the baby's born before they call. We have instructions that get so deep into how you can help with certain types of complications too. Like there's instructions here if the umbilical cord is presenting first, which my understanding is very dangerous for the baby. And we don't generally have to get into those kinds of things because fortunately they're a fairly rare complication. And also because in Ramsey County there's such a short response time for paramedics to get to the scene. I mean, in St. Paul, it can be as little as 4 minutes, and I think the longest responses are around 8 minutes. So fortunately, we don't have to do those things too often, but it's good to have them when they're needed. A lot of the questions that we get have to do with just exactly what we do, because people tend to be familiar with what police officers do and firefighters do, but they're not quite so familiar with what dispatchers do. If I have to put it in a sentence, I would say we're the communications link between the caller and the help that they need to come out to them. So in a sense, not a whole lot different than what your role is in taking calls at 211. We get information from the caller. We coordinate the police and fire response, which sometimes involves having multiple agencies respond. Just as an example, with fire departments, some fire departments have what they call auto aid agreements, and so if there's a structure fire call, there's one or more other departments that you would automatically page out when you get a call. So a lot of what we do has to do with getting information from the caller to determine what actually is happening and decide if we need to do that kind of thing. We'll get a lot of calls from people who will say something like, my house is on fire, and you ask what happened, and they'll say, well, we burnt some toast in the toaster. That's not really a house fire for dispatching purposes. And we understand why the caller's thinking of it that way, but that's why we ask a lot of the questions that we ask. We also do referrals to other agencies. I don't know that we do a whole lot of referrals to 211. I know it's a referral place for things like in the winter and I don't have heat or my landlord shut the heat off. It's one of the places that we can sometimes refer people to. So we do some things to other agencies. Another common question is, when should people call 911? Or we also have a non-emergency number that they can call, and the pre-consolidation non-emergency numbers for the agencies will still come to us. Basically, people should call 911 anytime they think help might be needed. It's better to call and have us say, we don't think we can help you, than to not call and have a situation escalate or have someone not get help that they need. There's also a state statute that says that you can call 911, that you as the caller can make the decision to call 911 anytime you believe a police, fire, or medical response is needed. So you have a state statute saying you can call us. And, people sometimes ask then, what do you do if you get like a problem call, or if you get someone who's just calling over and over and over? And there's stories in the media from time to time about people who will call 100 times in an hour. And that statute does not prevent us from dealing legally with people like that.
Denise, I wonder if you could just speak briefly, as you did yesterday, about how particularly older folks will make other calls before they call 911 and how that proves to be problematic for those folks.
Yes, we have a large group of people who are reluctant to call 911 seem to be older people. They will often, even when they call and we answer, they'll say, I'm sorry I'm bothering you. They'll, question whether or not they really need this type of help. I really think they feel like they're being a bother, and they're not being a bother. A lot of times they'll try to call friends, they'll try to call family, and it delays response. So by the time they're on the phone with us, if the call started out as they're having a little bit of difficulty breathing, they're so short of breath they can barely talk to us. So it causes delays in getting response out there. So really it goes back to any time you need help, call us, and it's better to call us and have us say, we can't help you with that, and point you in the direction of someone who can, rather than not call and have a problem get worse.
So we're back to, and so a great takeaway here for everyone, but we're back to basically what we've talked about before as it relates to legal emergencies. Remember, it's a small legal problem right now. Let's deal with it by finding a lawyer or a legal resource to help you. Now you're hearing humanity. It's a health issue that is, and maybe they'll call you about something, trying to get into a clinic, you're hearing great distress on the telephone, this sounds like the thing to say, call 911. Don't worry about trying to get into a clinic today, you know. Yes, Natanya.
Hi. I just wanted to interject that I've been in that situation. Well, I've received calls from elderly persons or even younger people sounding, I guess. And one of the hesitancies that they have is that they don't want they don't want an ambulance to come out because they don't want to be charged for that. So there's a lot of concern about, okay, I know that I'm in a situation now, but I want to make this as cheap as possible because I know that I'm going to get stuck with this huge bill.
Go ahead.
Ambulance bills can get to be pretty expensive. I could tell you that for the most part, you're not charged if the medics just come out and evaluate you.
Oh, okay.
There are some circumstances, outside of Ramsey County, there may be agencies that charge when they come out just to evaluate you, but it's going to be a lot cheaper than if they transport you to the hospital. I know a time when they will charge, it's more of a fire department thing, but vehicle extrications, they will charge that charge in some situations for that kind of thing. And sometimes for diabetic care, with diabetic care, a lot of times they don't transport people. You treat them at the scene, you get their blood sugar stabilized, and then you leave. So some agencies may charge for some of that kind of thing because that can involve an ambulance being at their house for 45 minutes to an hour in some situations. But I think I understand why people worry about the bills. I wouldn't worry too much. I mean, my experience, even with my mother, has been what her insurance pays for is what St. Paul Fire accepts as the payment. They have never sent her a bill for the balance. So, especially for people who have insurance, for the most part, your insurance covers it. There's a place on the reports the medics fill out when they do a transport that the doctor can sign off. They believe it's medically necessary, and when the doctor does that, it's very hard for insurance companies to say, we're not going to pay for it. And that's been my experience anyway. So I get why they're concerned, but again, they can have the medics come out. The medics can say, we think you're okay taking a cab, or they can say, hey, the nice neighbor who helped us get in the house, would you be willing to give them a ride to their clinic or what have you? And it can be reassuring then for them, to know that, okay, I don't necessarily need to actually go to the hospital by ambulance. I can have someone take me, and it's reassuring to the person who's going to take them as well. So,
do you know if medical assistance fits in that? Like people that have medical assistance, would they? Because we get a lot of callers that people that have medical assistance. So
medical assistance does pay.
Oh,
they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
I'm not sure if they think it's not medically necessary what they would do, but
Got it.
They do generally pay.
Okay. Great. Thank you for that.
Good stuff to know.
Yep. When people call us, although we do have 911 and we have non-emergency, the same people answer both lines. So in terms of who they're going to reach, it doesn't matter which number they call. What happens with the call, when you first call, the call gets answered by the telecommunicator. The telecommunicator asks the caller the questions that are needed to obtain information. The questions vary based on the type of the problem, but they will typically, it's the address, then it's your name, then it's your phone number, and you do have the right to not give your name, which is a common thing that makes people, I think, reluctant to call sometimes, especially in things like neighbor disputes, because they don't want people to know who called, and they can be anonymous. Fire and medical calls get transferred. Fire calls would go to our fire dispatchers. Medical calls in the cities St. Paul and Maplewood respond to go to our dispatchers. Alina handles medical calls in the rest of Ramsey County, and so calls would get transferred to them, and they do pre-arrival, and they use the same medical priority system that we use. Most important piece of information is where the problem is. So it's location, location, location. If we know nothing but that, we can send a police officer out to try to determine what the problem is. So we train our call takers. The first thing you should be asking for is, what's the address? The biggest location issue that we have is with cell phones, because back in the early days of 911, there weren't cell phones. Everybody had a landline phone, and when you called 911, we got the billing name, address, and phone number, which generally was where the people calling were at and where the problem was. But with cell phones, we don't get an exact address. Back in the early days of cell phones, the address that we got was actually the place where they bought the cell phone. And then it was nothing other than to tell us it was a cell phone, which actually in a way was better than the, here's where you bought the cell phone. We now get what are called XY coordinates, which are just a geographic way of assigning locations without a specific address. We can check them. You can check them in places like MapQuest, Google Maps, any place like that to get an address. It varies in accuracy. The very newest cell phones for us, because we have NG or next generation 911, to some degree, we get an estimate of the accuracy. We've seen some calls where the accuracy estimate, which is given in meters, is like 6,000 meters. So you're starting to talk about potential of being miles away from the caller actually is. But most of them are within 50 to 100 meters, which gets you to within a block or two. Next biggest problem that we have is that even those coordinates don't tell us where people are in a building. So if you're in a downtown high-rise, it might give us the address of the high-rise that you're in, but it's not going to tell us that you're on, say, the 20th floor. That's called a Z coordinate, and it's early stages of cell phone companies implementing, being able to provide us with that coordinate. And the way the implementation process for something like that works, it's probably going to be 3 to 5 years before we see Z coordinates on calls. So it's really important to give us the location. It's really important for callers to stay on the line if they possibly can, to give us that kind of information. Another common question that we get asked is, why do we ask so many questions? And we do ask a lot of questions sometimes. We're trying to get suspect information. We're trying to determine if people have weapons, how serious the incident is. When we're getting a lot of calls at once, it's kind of important for us to know that, and to be able to prioritize the call when we have a number of calls in the same area. We're also anticipating the information that police officers and firefighters ask. We try to anticipate the questions that they're going to have of the dispatcher. And we, sometimes if it's a third party, if for instance you were to call us on something, we'll try to contact the person who actually needs assistance to get more information if we can. With in-progress calls, we try to keep callers on the line, especially if they're in a position where they can see something. So if someone's calling to say their neighbor's house is being broken into, we like to keep them on the phone so that we can ask them questions about what's happening, get a description of the person. If they can see them moving around in the house, which sometimes they can keep us updated on where they are in the house. That kind of information is always useful for officers. At times I've given this kind of training to places like business owners associations. And at one presentation, a jewelry store owner had said that when it takes longer for the police to get there, usually what he finds happens is somebody driving on their way to the call had the suspect vehicle drive by them going in the opposite direction, or had a suspect run across the street in front of them or something like that. And so they've caught the suspect. It's when the police officer pulls up within a minute or two of his calling that it's like they don't find the person. So that's the biggest reason why we will keep people on the phone for police calls. when there is a suspect, we ask for information like the race, sex, age, height, weight, hair color, eye color, what they're wearing. It's most important to get that information for somebody with a weapon, and then to get a description of the weapon. And weapons are a big thing for us because it's such a huge safety issue. It's a safety issue for police officers and firefighters responding to the call, and it's also a safety issue for other people who are in the area. So that's something that's a huge concern for us. And then the other thing is any kind of a vehicle that they're in, license number, make, model, car, color, anything that's going to make the car stand out. So if you were to call us for something and you noticed that there's a huge rust spot on the right rear quarter panel, that's something that kind of thing is really great to tell us, because it's also something that stands out to police officers driving to a call too. Exact questions that we ask vary based on the situation and how recent it is. If we get like a parking complaint, we try to get descriptions of the car, but it's not really absolutely necessary. I mean, if you're concerned, for instance, about a car parked in a handicap spot at a business, we can send a police officer, a parking enforcement officer out there, and if there's a car parked in the handicap spot without a permit, they'll decide to either tag it or for whatever reason not tag it, but it doesn't really matter if it's the same call that you were calling about or not. And with something like that, they can't take enforcement action if the car is driven away. So it's good to have it, but if you don't have it, your caller doesn't have it, it doesn't stop us from sending somebody out.
Denise, can I stop you? And I think I'm recalling from when you and I prepared for your talk that, and maybe it wasn't you, but somebody told me about how some of your 911 people who are answering the calls are also trained to pick up on code words that people. Were you the one who told me that somebody kept calling and ordering pizza when they were in an abusive situation and they had the abuser there, and the caller knew no other way other than to call 911 to get an officer to the. Were you the one who told me that?
I don't recall if I was or not, but there was an incident, and it wasn't in the Twin Cities, but there was someone who didn't want to say in front of their abuser that, I'm in this situation. So said, I need to order a pizza, and as the person said, you realize you called 911, just kept talking about what information they'd give if they were ordering a pizza. So the person figured, okay, there's something else going on here, verified the address. You just made some comments they could answer yes or no in the same way, like, you might say, did you say you want the spicy sausage on that? To find out that this situation was going on. And we have staff that do that kind of thing all the time. They will ask, is there somebody else there with you? Should we send the police out? If they're saying, I don't want him to see that I'm on the phone, sometimes they'll say, just leave the line open and set the phone down. So we'll do those kinds of things. So if the person can't or doesn't feel comfortable talking to us, we will do those kinds of things so that we can still kind of keep an eye on what's going on as police are responding. And
I would think that those might be calls that you might get first from someone, and so I think that another takeaway here is that you're learning, all you guys are so smart, but you're learning, that when you've got to get somebody to 911, and, that just like 211 has exceedingly smart people, 911 has exceedingly smart people, and you've got people who have the benefit of a lot of years of experience, right?
Right.
So, and your training is phenomenal from
yes.
what you've explained to me. So I think that, you're going to sometimes use your instincts here as you're dealing with your callers, particularly the ones that are in situations where they're at risk. Get them to 911 as quickly as possible.
I had a question about that, because I actually had a call last weekend where the woman was in a panic. She was in a domestic violence situation. She had just gotten beaten up, was at her friend's, but the abuser knew exactly where her friend was, where the friend lived, and she was afraid that he was going to come back. And so I didn't, and then there was also a language barrier, so that was like another question that I had.
Sure.
But so I didn't know whether to call 911 because he may have been coming back, or to direct her to the crisis line, which is what I opted. So I don't know what your suggestion in that case would have been.
Great question. Wonderful question for us to hear.
With that kind of situation, anytime there's been a domestic situation, if they're comfortable having the police come out, willing to have the police come out, they should be calling us. They should be calling 911, or you can call on their behalf. Especially if they think he might be coming back. If they think that, that's kind of one of the danger signs that there's a serious problem there, and it could be escalating. Things like being afraid he's going to come back, being afraid he's going to hurt the children, being afraid he's going to hurt pets. Those kind of things are indications that there's potentially a serious situation there, and the domestics are anyway, but those are warning signs that you have a situation that's escalating, where someone really seriously could get hurt.
Well, and the abuser might leave to go get a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that might be why they left. We've had people who've come back with friends, to help them do whatever they're thinking they're going to do.
Yes, Melissa.
Going back to those code words, though, from previous jobs that I've done, I've heard that there are code words to sometimes use for dispatchers to make so that they become more of a priority, where they'll get a faster response time. So is there really such thing as technically code words where they'll kind of move up on that priority list so that the police come sooner? Or
in sort of the sense of, if you use a certain word, it's going to make police come faster? Not really, no. We base it on what's going on at the situation. So I would say there's no particular word that you should use. Best thing to get the response, the help that you really need there as quickly as you need it is, to just tell us what's going on. I've been asked that question too before, especially with certain types of problems, is, can you give me some special words that I can say? And there really isn't anything special. I think the idea of, of doing something like saying, I need to order a pizza, is you can kind of give us the information and answer our questions kind of yes, no, without cluing in the person who's with you that you're calling. There's not really any sort of magical word or phrase or something that you can say where we're going to know what you're talking about and send a squad there faster.
Okay.
And I guess my last thing in response to what Natanya asked is, it may be in a situation where the caller says, I can't call 911 because I'm worried that I'll be on the phone with them or whatever, and that may put you in a situation, and you're trained to do this, it may put you in the situation where you have to call 911 on their behalf. So, these are tricky situations. My suggestion always is to err on the side of caution as much as possible, and of course you've got supervisors on the floor all the time, and make sure you bring something that's tricky to someone else and get their input into it. But you guys are trained well. You got somebody in a life-threatening situation. You know what to do, right?
And it's always, no matter what the situation is, it's always better to get police help there, to get fire help there, to get whatever they need there.
And we have just a couple more minutes left. Sorry,
okay.
Denise, but can I ask you if you could just speak about, and this is I think very important, the difference between 211 doing a warm transfer to 911, okay, here in Bloomington for a dispatch, say, in Ramsey County, versus 211 calling your business number. You talked about this yesterday.
Yes. Since you are in Bloomington, if you call 911 from here, your call will go to Bloomington. So that question came up yesterday that a lot of people then, instead of using 911 from here, will call us directly or transfer someone to us directly. The advantage to doing that is that if you call 911, the call goes to Bloomington, you have to explain to them what's going on, and then they have to transfer the call to us. So if you call us directly, then you don't have to explain it to Bloomington first.
And your direct number is what now? We have it down here on the...
Yeah, 651-767-0640.
And that is on page 3 of the training material at the top. So you might want to circle that, because that would be true for any caller who's coming out of Ramsey County.
Right, any caller who's outside of Ramsey County, any situation that you're dealing with here where you're thinking you need to call us and get somebody started. It's just something to keep in mind that if you call 911, you have to go through Bloomington first. Just a quick review of some of these slides. We're busiest in the afternoon and early evening, slowest in the early morning. If it's really busy, we do sometimes triage calls in a sense, so we don't ask as many questions. What police do depends on what's going on at the time. It depends on what they see when they get to a scene. I don't want to get into too much detail here because we don't have a police officer here to talk about it. But they do, it varies from officer to officer, from department to department, just based on sometimes department policy and then based on what they see happening. Sometimes there's options to do things like give reports over the phone. So if you have someone who's reluctant to have police come out to their house, that is a potential option. St. Paul is also in the process of implementing internet reporting, and so when someone goes online to report something, the report that's generated is the same report that an officer would write if they came out to their house. That's also true of phone reports. It's the same report. Texting and video to 911, one of the questions that I was told you guys had was, can we do that right now? And the answer is no. In order to do texting and video to 911, phone company equipment, phone lines, our equipment, our phones all need to be upgraded. And so a lot of that work has been done, but we are still in the process of purchasing the phone equipment. That needs, and all of that kind of thing needs to be purchased, installed, and people need to be trained on it. So texting will likely come first, probably later in 2015, and then video after that. People are a little bit apprehensive about it. I've said many times my concern is knowing people, knowing human nature, that it wouldn't surprise me if our first call is somebody who's upset that somebody's blocking their driveway and they really want to send us a video of the car blocking their driveway.
For 5 minutes. For
5 minutes, yeah, that they'll sit there now, see, and want to do different camera angles. I'm sure it's going to prove in the long run to be valuable. It's something that's new that people get apprehensive about. I talked about medical calls already. Fire calls, we don't have a system like the medical priority for fire calls. I think the biggest thing would be we ask questions about what's going on. We sometimes ask a lot of questions with fire calls too. But we don't want people to approach hazardous situations. So the idea is they tell us what they can see from where they're feeling safe. And then the other thing is language line. And what do we do with people who don't speak English? Most of our callers speak English well enough to give us sort of a basic idea of where they are and what they need. But that isn't always the case. And there's a language line service that's paid for by the state of Minnesota for dispatch centers to use when they have a situation where a police, fire, or medical response may be needed. The service offers around 140 languages, and some of them are, very common, like Spanish. Some of them are very obscure. Some of them, they might have only 1 or 2 translators, so they might not even be available when they're needed. So what we do in those situations, if we can get location information, we'll send a police officer to investigate. Sometimes we'll ask if somebody speaks English. We'll have them look for somebody who speaks English if it's that dire. We have staff who speak Spanish, Hmong, Vietnamese. I think we have a few people who speak a little bit of Chinese. We have people who speak French, German. Probably the most common language that we don't have anyone who speaks is Karen. So we use Language Line quite a bit for Karen translations. As I said, for the most part, people do know enough English to be able to tell us where they're at. Yes?
Sure, you mentioned that you take like a million calls and that you try to prioritize them. What's the toughest time, I guess, to get in contact with 911, and when is the toughest that you've seen to balance out all those calls? And I mean, is there a certain time of day that's like
it's the
really
busiest rough? The busiest time where we get the longest of what we call the pending queue in CAD, which is our dispatch computer, which is the list of calls that are waiting to be dispatched. The worst times for that are during the summer on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday evenings, because that's when a lot of people don't have to be at work the next day and they're out and about, and people are out of their houses more and their windows are open and their doors are open, so neighbors sometimes irritate them more than they would in the middle of winter. Slowest time of day year-round is usually around 3 to 5, maybe 6 in the winter. The times that you're most likely to end up having to wait for a squad, and no matter what city you're in, there tends to be a little bit more need to wait in St. Paul than some of the suburbs we dispatch for, but the time where you're most likely to need to wait in any city is probably around noon to midnight, just because that's the time of the day where most people are out and about. And busiest time is late afternoon, early evening, and we tend to get things like people are coming home from work and finding out somebody burglarized their house while they were at work and things like that. Early morning, like 6 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m. can be really busy for medical calls, because that's when people sadly get up and find, somebody sick or it got sick overnight.
I think that might be all the time that we've got, Denise.
Okay.
So.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, sure,
I
Melissa.
apologize. Just out of curiosity, how do you guys handle mental health calls? Like if sometimes we get callers who just want to talk or may not be at the point of suicide, or where it's not an imminent danger. Do you guys refer them on to Crisis Connection or Ramsey County Mental Health, or how is that usually handled?
If someone is very upfront about, I just need a referral, I need to know who I should call, we do refer them. We have a rule of thumb that if somebody is threatening to hurt themselves, threatening that something that sounds like it might happen like right now, or if they've attempted to hurt themselves in the past 24 hours, or if they're threatening to hurt someone else, we do need to send someone. If there's no one who's physically injured who needs medical attention, it may just be police. If it sounds like somebody might be hurt or might need medical attention, we will also send paramedics. I would say most of the time we end up sending someone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for example, let's say you get a call a caller says there's something planted into my teeth and I can't get it out and it's the government's watching me. Would you guys send someone out, or would you refer them on?
With something like that, I think we would generally try to refer them on rather than to send somebody out. And a lot of times with people who are like that, who think that there's something implanted in their brain or something like that, a lot of times they just want to talk, and they'll talk for 5 minutes and then say, okay, I'm fine now, and want to hang up. So we do have, we spend some time on the phone just kind of talking to some of those people.
Okay.
Great questions. Oh, my goodness.
That's a very good question.
Well, Denise, thank you so very much for your time today
Welcome.
and for coming and sharing about 911. And Cyril, thank you. Hello. Okay, this will be the second half of our training session today. We'll be talking about criminal expungements, and our speaker is Andrea Palumbo, who is the criminal records staff attorney at the Council on Crime and Justice based out of Minneapolis. She is responsible for coordinating criminal record workshops, facilitating trainings for employers and criminal justice personnel, and representing pro bono clients in criminal records-related matters. Prior to her employment at the council, Andrea managed a private law firm that focused on criminal record expungement and related issues. Before that, she worked in health and safety with the American Red Cross. Please help me welcome Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep. We will be talking about criminal records expungement. And as Ellie said, it's kind of the other end of the 911 system where people are coming out having entered generally through a 911 call. Had to make some kind of connection there. I'm with the Council on Crime and Justice, and we seek, our vision is that we seek a criminal justice system that's equitable and just, treats people with compassion and dignity, and allows for second chances, creating a safe and thriving community. And the work we do is to eliminate racial disparities in the criminal justice system and identify, address, and reduce the collateral consequences of a criminal record. That's the area that I'm focusing in. And we also advocate for a strong and individual system response to victims of crime with a focus on those least likely to have their needs met. And that's kind of the other half of what we do. When police are responding to a victim, our number is on the card that they give a victim, and we have a 24-hour victim services hotline.
Something important to remember.
And that can be anything from emotional support to really practical things like my purse has just been stolen, what do I do, to anything that people need to get connected with more serious emotional support resources. We'll be looking at criminal expungement today, and that's really, that's been a hot topic lately. The law changed January 1st, and we've had a lot of interest in the new law. A lot of people in Minnesota and in the U.S. have criminal records, there's been these numbers are slightly out of date because we just had a new report to the legislature come out, so I'm going to have to get these updated. But in 2013, we had over 130,000 arrests in Minnesota, and 26,000 juveniles were arrested. And even if it's just an arrest, if it doesn't go to court, that's enough to put a person on the radar of the system, so to speak. That creates a record. And 1 in 3 people in the U.S. have a criminal record, and 1 in 5 Minnesotans. And that's kind of statewide, the 1 in 5. Communities of color are disproportionately affected by that, so their rate is higher. I think you were saying 1 in 3 for African Americans in Minnesota.
1 in 3 African American males has some kind of criminal record.
And
appalling.
Records are unbelievably accessible now, and this is something that's happened really over the past few years. There's public criminal records that are viewable online, and MinSys is the Minnesota Court Information System, and the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA, they both have websites where people can access that information online. There's also professional databases that are available online, like FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Administration. I blanked for a second. That's a professional database for people who are working in the securities industry, so stockbrokers and brokerage houses. And there's also non-professional websites, and these have really exploded over the past few years. And they're primarily mugshot web pages where for-profit companies are harvesting information off of these other websites and putting it online. And very often people have to pay to get their information taken down. So we're seeing a lot of those have just popped up all over the place.
Are those the websites that you have to pay to
get
into and see?
Generally, sometimes you can just click on them to see them, but now more and more are requiring that you actually pay to look at in-depth information. So it'll show that John Smith in your neighborhood has a record, but to actually see what kind of record, you got to pay to get that information. And if you're John Smith, you have to pay to get that taken down. So yeah, those are an interesting and new phenomenon. Now, a criminal record can affect someone's life in a lot of different ways, and I took these examples from my clients. I had a client lose their job from a 5th-degree assault charge that was about 8 years old, and 5th degree is the lowest level of assault that there is. I've had a person have multiple trespass citations. This is really kind of sad. He wasn't on the lease for his mom's apartment, and he kept crashing at her place, so they kept trespassing him off. And he wasn't able to volunteer at a hospital because he had a bunch of those. I had a person who was 64 years old find out at the Canadian border that he couldn't enter Canada because he had a juvenile theft case from 1961 when he was a teenager. And I've also had a client get turned down for senior housing because she had a forgery from 1974. So even though something is kind of out of sight, out of mind, it can come back. And a lot of people have an idea that criminal records will just kind of fall off their records and they just won't be there anymore. And that's not entirely accurate. They may not be readily visible to the public, but they're still there. They don't go anywhere. Now, for what we're going to be looking at when we're talking about the new changes in the new law, I want to touch on our government structure real quick. We have 3 branches of government, both in the federal and the state level. And in Minnesota, records are housed really involve the judicial and the executive branch. The legislative branch doesn't really enter into what we're looking at. And they can be housed in the court level, under the judicial branch, or in the executive branch. And the executive branch agencies are the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, Department of Human Services, and MDH. And prior to January 1st, you really you didn't see the judicial branch reaching over into the executive branch to order records sealed there. It was really a separation of powers issue that kept people from really getting a good remedy when they were looking for an expungement. So when someone hits the criminal justice system, from the point they get arrested to the point where they get sentenced and complete their probation or whatever, records are created in both the court system in the judicial branch and the executive branch. And generally, they get arrested, so they start in the executive branch, and then they go to court, and then they do their court proceedings, and then when they're sentenced, they go back into the executive branch, and the BCA keeps track of all the records there. And if the person is working in healthcare or wants to work in healthcare, DHS and MDH could get involved. So basically, the trail that a person leaves is under these 2 branches of the government. Now, BCA is kind of the odd one out. Not every crime is required to get reported to the BCA, but at this point, most police departments report everything. They absolutely have to report higher level stuff, gross misdemeanors and felonies, certain misdemeanors, but right now they're just reporting everything. Now, the big change in the law, like I said, prior to January, if someone filed an expungement petition, their chances of getting everything sealed, both the executive branch records and the judicial branch records, was really low. There were very limited circumstances where a judge could reach into the executive branch and order records sealed. You basically can't have one branch of the government ordering another branch of the government around. So that was a problem. When most places that do background checks are checking, they are usually going to the BCA records first. So if you couldn't seal those records, you really didn't have what we call a meaningful remedy. People weren't getting something that would help them out of the court system. So come January of this year, people were really, only half of the records were getting sealed, and it didn't help people very much, quite honestly. Where we are now, the law has been changed so that a judge is able to order both of those branch records sealed, which is huge. It really is helping people get something that's really going to help them. The law also expands the factors that a court considers. It used to be really limited. They had to show that the records are hurting them. They can't get a job. They can't get housing. Now they can show that they're going to need them when they go looking for a job or housing. They don't have to have that proof that it's already hurt them.
Can I just stop you briefly?
Sure.
In your training papers, this time around, you've got an attachment B that is for one way to get the expungement. But I just wanted to make sure that maybe you could mention there are all the check boxes
sure.
on the form that the court could order for these different agencies that you've been talking about.
Most of the people who, that's a great point, most of the people who go to court for expungements end up representing themselves, and they use pre-prepared forms from the court webpage, and they're really nice because they have all of the possible agencies whose records could be affected, and the form that's in your packet is if a prosecutor has agreed ahead of time to seal the records, ideally the judge can just check off which...
You might want to hold that up so everybody can see what
which
we're talking
agencies
about,
are going to
which
be
form.
affected, and which courts, which counties, which police departments, and the judge can just fill this in and check them off.
And Andrea, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So,
and the
could
other
you also
forms
talk
have
about
the same thing.
And where do the forms come from? Where can people find those forms?
I refer people to the Minnesota Courts webpage, which is mncourts.gov. And across the top of the webpage, over to the left, there's a box, Self-Help Center. And if someone clicks on that, it's going to bring up another page with blue boxes, and criminal expungement is one of the blue boxes they can check on. And the forms have just been updated to reflect the new law. And the other thing that's on there, which is super important for anyone who's anticipating going to court, is how to apply for a fee waiver. When you apply for an expungement, there is a filing fee, and pretty much for anything that isn't criminal, there's a filing fee. So I really encourage people to look at the forms for requesting a fee waiver, because if you don't have to pay that fee, absolutely request it. Most people who are eligible for Minnesota Care, medical assistance, if they're getting some kind of public assistance or need-based Social Security, they're most likely eligible for a fee waiver. So I always encourage people to apply for that. The other thing with the new law is that there are specific time guidelines for filing. And most people who enter the court system, they will be helped by the new law. The big hang-up that we are seeing is not all felonies are covered, and people do have to wait. So if someone is still on probation, they need to wait till their sentence is done. For petty misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors, these are most of the cases I've seen. A person has to go 2 years from the end of their sentence or 4 years from the end of their sentence without another conviction before they can file an expungement and get all the records sealed, I should say. If they have a stay of adjudication with a guilty plea or diversion with a guilty plea, they have to go 1 year without a conviction. And only certain felonies right now are covered. They have to go 5 years without an additional conviction. And here's some examples of the eligible felonies we have right now. The thing to kind of bear in mind, most of these do not involve physical harm to a person. They're theft, forgery, aggravated forgery, check forgery, receiving stolen goods, passing bad checks, lower level theft, controlled substance in the 5th degree. Mm-hmm.
Sure, I just wanted to clarify one term quick. You keep saying sealed. Is that sealed to certain parties or sealed for a certain amount of time?
That's a great question.
Expunged, or how does that work?
I tend to say sealed because the records are not destroyed. It used to be they were actually physically destroyed, and that doesn't happen now. They are sealed more or less to public view. They can be reopened in the future if a prosecutor needs access to them, or if a person is going into law enforcement and they need to have a background check run, there's very specific careers that need access to those records. So they're really sealed from public view. When someone does get an expungement, what literally happens, the BCA changes how those records are cataloged so they can't be accessed. But if law enforcement or a prosecutor needs to, does a search on those records, they'll get a notation that there's sealed records available. And if needed, they can get a court order to reopen them. But for background checks, employment background checks and things like that, they will not be visible at all.
So not visible at all, does that mean that they can't see that anything ever happened, or do they see that something happened but they can't know what it is?
For businesses and third parties, they won't see anything.
Okay.
So law enforcement or prosecutors, they will see that something happened and they need to take action to get more information on what happened.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. The records in general are never physically gone, but they're, to all intents and purposes, they can't be seen by the public.
Okay, cool.
Now, some things absolutely cannot be expunged. Any conviction that requires a person register, and those are generally sex offenses, predatory offenses, by law, those can't be expunged. Right now, violent felonies cannot be fully expunged. The court records could be sealed because that is the power of the court. They can control their own records. It's directing another branch of the government that they can't do. The list of felonies, we're hoping that gets expanded because it's not helping a whole lot of people right now. So right now, the violent felonies can't be fully expunged, and there's a specific exemption in the statute for domestic violence. The domestic violence and sexual assault agencies needed additional time to look at the issue because the populations they serve need some access to some records that potentially could be expunged. So the compromise was to leave that expiration in place to give them more time to look at the issue. So as the law stands right now, anything that involves domestic violence or sexual assault can't be expunged until after July 15th. That exception is set to expire at that time.
And Andrea, maybe it goes without saying, but because I'm neurotic, I'll just mention it, that expungement's not automatic. So the fact that you just simply file the paperwork and you file it correctly, you still need to convince a judge, and Andrea's going to get to this, but I just sort of thought I'd mention it right now. You still need to convince a judge that it's justified, that it's in the best interest of the person and you'll get into the weighing thing. But so I just want everybody to remember that part.
Yeah, absolutely. The waiting period gets you in the door, but you still need to establish that this is something that you need, and you need it more than the public needs to know about the record. The couple provisions in the new law, the training attachment B refers to the order where a prosecutor agrees and the victims of the crime, if there are any, are notified. No petitions required, which is really nice because the petition has a filing fee. So if you can do it without a petition and without a filing fee, that is really advantageous. That's a really new provision, though, and we're really not sure how that's going to play out. And if expunged records are knowingly opened and distributed in a way that's not authorized by the law, now has a cause of action under the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. So there have been some cases with driver records getting accessed and driver license records getting accessed. That's the same sort of thing that we're looking at. If someone's record is sealed and it gets released and the person finds out about it, they can bring an action to recover damages for that. Now, we had a question yesterday, what happens if someone just got arrested? That can be enough to cause some problems. If someone is arrested and the charges are dismissed prior to getting to court, or if there's the prosecutor decides they're not going to prosecute or there's no indictment, if a person doesn't have any convictions within 10 years of that incident, they can do what's what's called a 299C11 letter, and that means that they can write a letter to the jurisdictions that have their records, and they can get the records returned, and the BCA will seal the records that they have. So this is a really easy way to get that record out of the public view without going to court. And if we get phone calls about records, or if people come to our legal clinics, first thing we look at is, did you go to court? Is this only an arrest? We can take care of this much simpler than going to court. So this is something to keep in mind if someone if they've had an encounter with law enforcement, this is a way to take care of it. I call it the really easy way, and then there's the easy way and the not so easy way. And that's the really easy way to take care of criminal records. The overview, and if you're talking to people, this is a really important overview to keep in mind. Expungements take time. They're not automatic, and it takes time to prepare the petition and the paperwork. So initially preparing the petition is kind of the first big job. It has to be filed and served on all jurisdictions and agencies that have records. And then there's statutory waiting periods. There has to be 60 days notice period for all possible objections. That could come from the prosecutor. The victims need to be notified. The person filing the petition doesn't actually have to notify the victims. The prosecutor will do that, but the victims have to have notice of the petition. Then there's the court hearing, and an order is issued. It is really rare to find out the day of the hearing what the judge is going to do. That almost never happens. And then 60 days after the order is the possible appeal period. And then after that time, the order's final. So best case scenario, you're usually looking at 4 or 5 months. Usually I tell people 6 months from start to finish for the whole process to play out.
Just one question. Is that court hearing, that doesn't invite the victim, they just have the opportunity to respond, right? Or are they allowed to come to the court?
The victim can come to the courtroom. I've never had it happen, but the victim can come. Generally, the victim is notified, and if they want to make an objection, they usually do that by letter.
But also the person looking for the petition can bring whoever they want to the
They
courtroom
can bring
as
whoever
well.
they want. In some instances, actually, the person bringing the petition may bring the victim. If the victim would be a strong witness for saying, look, I know what happened, and he's really changed. This is a really different situation. I very much support this petition. That's one of those instances where I really counsel people, be real careful about what you want to do with that, and talk to a lawyer if you're thinking about that, because that could be a potential minefield.
Sure. What are some scenarios where an appeal might happen? I'm trying to think of entities that might want to appeal this sort of thing. Or
well, if the person bringing the petition doesn't get the result they want, they can always appeal.
Oh, okay.
That's one instance. We have seen a couple times where an expungement has been granted, and the police or the county may appeal because they objected very strongly, and they're very against that record being sealed.
And can we go back just real quick and just reinforce the idea that this is not an easy process for, even though it's set up to do pro se, people doing it on their own, that we're recommending that
absolutely.
211 refer everybody to clinics so that they can talk to a lawyer.
There's really been a movement in the court system over the past few years to help people represent themselves, because many people can't afford a lawyer and they're not eligible for low-cost legal assistance. So there are some really excellent self-help resources out there, and they can help people fill out the forms and fill out the forms correctly, but they really can't give legal advice. They can't tell a person that, you're going to waste your time if you go forward with this because it's just too soon, or you have a really good chance of getting this done. So I recommend that at some point, if someone can go to a clinic where they have a chance to talk to an attorney for a few minutes, the Hennepin County Self-Help Center has lawyers available to do that. Absolutely, at some point, talk to a lawyer or go to a clinic and have them look at your situation.
And you've got some resources at the back of the training material, of course, as usual. So those are good places. But there are going to be more places that will be doing expungement work that will have clinics out there. So a good place to go, send folks other than theirs to lawhelpmn.org, because they'll have a listing. The court self-help centers will have places that will have that as well. If they contact Volunteer Lawyers Network, the VLN is doing a lot of training, so that's a place. And outstate, you're going to get, well, let me ask you, Andrea, does the Council on Crime and Justice do work just metropolitan, or are you outstate? Are you doing Greater Minnesota as well?
We, Council on Crime and Justice works with the Volunteer Lawyers Network, and the Volunteer Lawyers Network is statewide. And we hold 2 trainings a month in conjunction with the Volunteer Lawyers Network. We do Second Chance Saturday, which is the 3rd Saturday of the month at the UROC Center on Plymouth and Penn, and we do a First Tuesday seminar at the Minneapolis Urban League. So that's how we connect with people, and we put them in touch with VLN, and they can do potentially full representation. Outside of that, I recommend that people call their local legal aid office and find out if they have resources available, and if they don't, they'll connect people to other resources.
Great, thank you.
Okay, and with kind of preparing the petition, there's some stages where there's an awful lot of work. I would say the biggest part at the very beginning is getting the forms and getting the documents. And it's really important that people get records and documents from the BCA, from law enforcement, and from the court. And unfortunately, all of these generally have a cost connected with them. It's $8 for a person to request their BCA form, their BCA record. And what they need to do is request both the public and the private records. After 15 years, criminal records are no longer public. They go to a private status, and I think that's where people are thinking that records they're just falling off. They're still there, but they're not publicly available. So you need to make sure that you request both. Incident reports from police and court records. If you want to get court records, you need to actually go to the courthouse to get them. If they're viewed anywhere other than a courthouse, they won't be complete. Court records have, if courthouse access has everything connected with a court case shown on the records, and those do have a cost to run those off. If you look at your court stuff at home, you're only going to see things that are closed and final convictions, nothing that's been dismissed and nothing that's pending. Now, when people are preparing the petition, this is where people really fall down. If someone goes to court and says, I need my records sealed because I can't find a job, that's only part of what the court needs to hear. They need to show, okay, I can't get a job, I can't get housing, my career plans are on hold, I can't travel outside the United States. That's really important. They need to show the court that. They also need to be really specific about how that's happening. I lost a job because of my record. I can't get hired. They need to prove that their record's hurting them. Very often it's difficult to get proof on paper that you can't get a job because of your record. Housing's a little easier. If people get turned down for housing, very often the housing places will tell them flat out, it's because of your record.
Does this ever pertain to D-dubs?
They are a really fuzzy area right now. There's nothing in the law that says they can't seal them.
You're talking about DWIs?
DWIs, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And traffic offenses. There's nothing that says a person can't have those expunged. The Department of Public Safety Driver Vehicle Services has to keep those records. So they absolutely have to be kept on the Department of Motor Vehicles. But in the other areas, theoretically it's possible. I haven't seen it happen yet.
Okay. What about unlawful detainers?
Those are, they're a different area, and there's actually a petition in your training materials. It's really similar to criminal record expungements, but it's not exactly the same thing. They can be expunged if there is something wrong with how they were done, if they weren't served properly, if legally there's a problem with the case, or if the person needs them sealed more than the public needs to know about them. And there's a housing self-help center in Hennepin County that works with that, and Legal Aid in Minneapolis does a lot of work with expunging eviction records. Even if the case is resolved in the person's favor, just having that record out there can hurt for rental housing. So I refer all people over that I talk to Legal Aid for those, because they really know those the law around that. And also Homeline's a good resource for that too.
So this would be the Housing Court Project over at Hennepin County. And by the way, the hours of that have changed. Jackie should be sending you out, or Mary should be sending you out a notice about how the Housing Court hours project hours have changed. That's an aside. And Smurls will also do expungements on UDs. Okay, so they exist. Now, however, if somebody got evicted because they didn't pay rent, they're not going to get their expunged. They're not going to have it
go anywhere.
Get it expunged. So, but you don't want, what you want to be telling. You don't want to be telling people that. Right. Okay, you just want to be saying, here's where to go. So, but we just tell you this, of course, and our folks at home, but.
I just had a question about the jobs. And so you kind of went through it because you indicated that you have to prove that you're not getting the jobs. But I've noticed in job applications, especially like for retail, et cetera, that there's a little clause in there that says that you have to declare, but it won't automatically count against you. But then, so how could you prove that that was the final thing?
It's hard. Sometimes when someone applies for a job and they get turned down because of their background check, they'll actually get a letter saying, here's the background check that we got on you, and an adverse action may be taken on your employment. That's great. That's proof right there. Sometimes that doesn't happen. If someone has applied for, say, 50 jobs that they're well qualified for and they haven't gotten a single interview, or they've gotten turned down for every one, being able to keep a list of those and record that and put that in the petition is usually the best that a person can come up with proof that they're trying. They have applied. And sometimes I've seen people who've applied for 50 or 100 jobs that they really should have gotten, and they haven't gotten past the application stage. That's a good showing that they're trying and something is holding them back, and it's probably their criminal record.
Thank you.
Now, when you're proving the case, this is really important. The burden of proof depends on how the case was resolved, and a case was either resolved in a person's favor or not. If it was resolved in favor, this is really the best possible situation. If they were found not guilty, if they were the case was dismissed, or it was dismissed without an admission of guilt, then the person will go into court with the benefit of the doubt that the court will seal that record unless the agency who holds the record can show that the interests of the public outweigh the disadvantages to the petitioner. So there, you will get the record sealed unless someone can raise a good enough reason why it shouldn't be. So these are the situations that we really like to see. If it was not resolved in favor, and this is actually most people who go through the court system, they resolve their case with a plea agreement. This is where the burden is flipped. The person has to show that they need this more than the burden on the court and the risk to public safety. So they don't go in with a benefit of the doubt. They need to show that the risk to the public is at least as much as the disadvantages to the petitioner. What I tell people is always think of you need this more than the public needs to know about it. Here's the benefits to you. You're going to have a better job. You're going to have safe housing, stable housing, a better education. You're going to be a productive member of society. That's what you're going to show. And the burden on the court and the danger to the public are really, really low.
I'm kind of trying to think of how to phrase this, interested in knowing about the interplay between like the civil and the criminal courts. So let's say that somebody, it was maybe substance related, they haven't had a criminal conviction for a long time, they want an expungement so maybe they can move on with their life and have a CHIPS case closed. Is the judge judging the expungement request going to see there's an open CHIPS case and they've left 30 UAs?
Wonderful question. Wonderful question. There is a lot of interplay between, say, a CHIPS case or a custody case. The judge will absolutely take that into account.
For our audience, can you explain what a CHIPS case is?
A CHIPS case is a child in need of protection case where child protection has somehow been called to the scene, and there's another person in the picture. The county's in the picture. They're looking at whether or not a child should be taken from the home. That's one of the reasons why we have the July 15th hold on domestic violence cases and sexual assault cases. That's exactly the situation where they need to look at what kind of records have to stay open in exactly those situations. If someone has an open CHIPS case, or if they have a child custody case or something like that, where another branch of the court or another branch of the judicial system is involved, another part, if there's a civil case, they're probably not going to get their records sealed, mainly because right now we're not sure how much information other parties are going to need. Now, that's a really good question. Very often people are looking to get records sealed because of child custody issues or things like that. And right now, the likelihood of getting that sealed is really, really low. That could totally change after July 15th. Okay. But it is something that the court looks at.
Thank you.
Now, the thing that I think what you're going to be hearing on your end is someone may be calling and they may be asking, I've heard about expungements and I want to get my records sealed. What do I do? So really what you can do is refer them to agencies where they can really sit down and get some more information from an attorney and some help filling out the forms.
And we should probably talk about the clinics that you would refer them to. Many times you have many people at these clinics, and so the lawyers will stand up and do exactly what Andrea is here doing, explaining how the process works. But then they'll get the opportunity, most of the time, to be able to have 15 minutes with a lawyer to look at the records, look at what their story is, and be able to help guide them. Very rarely is anybody going to get an attorney to walk them through the whole process.
It's really kind of rare. If someone's looking for that, they really need to look at hiring a private attorney. And many attorneys who do expungement work will do it at a lower cost because we know it is the person who is looking for an expungement very often doesn't have a lot of resources. But if they're looking for someone to work with them every step of the way, that is really looking at full representation from a private attorney. When people go to court, I tell them this is your chance to tell your story. Tell them how the record's hurting you, how's an expungement going to help you. It's not enough to say, I've changed my life. You really need to, the judge needs to hear, this record's hurting me. Here's how it's hurting me. Here's how it's going to benefit me. They want to hear you're sorry, you changed your life, you're a different person, but they really need specifics on how a court order will help them. Be polite. Don't interrupt the judge. That's a really big part of it. You can bring people to support you if you just want them there in the courtroom with you. That's fine. Courtrooms are open to the public, so that's something else to keep in mind. There will be people there. The judge will probably ask some questions, and it's because they're interested in what's going on. He or she is looking for more information. They very often they're asking, are you working? How's your housing? They want clarification. They're not trying to trap anyone or nail anyone. They're interested in finding out facts. Now, once the order comes out, person's petition either will be granted or won't be. If it was not granted, or if it was granted in some areas and not others. It's not unusual to see judges seal everything except for records connected with DHS or MDH. And if you want records connected with DHS sealed, you have to specifically address the petition to them. It's really, that's another benefit of working with a lawyer at some point, to make sure you're getting your paperwork to everywhere it needs to go. There's no prescribed waiting period to file again, but the order from the judge may say you should wait another year and then file. Very often, if people are denied, it's because the petition was too soon, or they haven't shown enough rehabilitation, or they haven't shown a benefit. So you can get a lot of information on what to do the next time around just by reading the order. If it is granted, first thing a person should do is make extra copies, certified copies of that order, because if you ever need to refer back to that case, the only way you can find it is to bring a motion to reopen the case. So this is an issue very often in immigration. If someone is applying for citizenship, they can expunge their records, but they are going to need to disclose that they have an expunged record. So it's really important. Keep a copy of that order someplace. Send copies of the order to anywhere that may have old records. And this is where, like, if someone has had a background check run for a job and they get that order, they get their records sealed, they should send a copy of the order to the company that did the background check. It used to be that employers went directly to the BCA, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, to run background checks. Now they're going to third-party companies. So it's really important to make sure the BCA has a copy of the order, which should happen because the court will order the BCA to seal their records, but also any other third-party companies and any tenant screening agencies. This can be really challenging, because very often a third-party company may have run a background check and they're using out-of-date information. So it's almost like whack-a-mole. A person needs to track when that record shows up again and send a copy of the order out and get it to the company to tell them, hey, update your records. If they do that and there's still out-of-date information coming out of that source, then a person can bring a Fair Credit Reporting Act complaint for damages for having that information out there.
Well, that kind of answers my question, because you wouldn't want to put the burden on the person that just, expunged it to try to show like a screening agency, because what trust would you have for them to actually complete that action and follow through and make sure that concurrently doesn't happen again, where they're reporting badly on you?
Yeah, ideally the situation is going to play out that they get the record sealed and they go apply for a job. And when the third-party background check company runs the background check, it doesn't show up because they're running it off of information that's accurate and up-to-date. So ideally that should happen, but if they do have any kind of issue, and I see this often with tenant screening services. The tenant screening services has out-of-date information, then the person can go to the landlord and say, hey, your information's out of date. I have an expungement. So you denied me on the basis of information that's incorrect.
So that's the government's way of, because that was one of my main questions, is how to make sure that, these companies are not, are complying with, what they can and can't see. I guess the government is going to make that not available to them or available, but, I guess
that's going to be a huge issue in the future. With more and more third parties.
What will happen is there'll be one or two big lawsuits as a result of violating the law.
Sure.
And then the companies will take whatever extra measures, because it's one thing to have the government tell you to need to do something. It's another thing for a jury to tell you that you have to do something in terms of dollars. So,
yeah, the government agencies are pretty good at sealing the records and shutting down access. When it gets into a third party's hands, that's when you have potential Fair Credit Reporting Act cases, and there are a couple that are kind of percolating in the system right now, where the smaller companies are generally the ones that are not as good with their data. The larger companies, like the three big companies that handle credit reports, they're a lot better. But there will, what Ellie was saying is true. If someone does get harmed by having the record out there, they absolutely have a right to bring legal action. And once that happens enough times, then we'll see some changes in how these records are kept.
Of course, we would always recommend that somebody go talk to a lawyer before
Absolutely.
they go and do anything like that, because we're not giving legal advice.
Yep, absolutely.
And Andrea, you've got you have 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So I just had a question, I guess going back to liability and the employer. So in the first example that you gave at the beginning about somebody being fired because of a record that was from 8 years ago, would under this law, would the employer then be potentially held liable for firing the employee? Because now, could it ever be that it could come back to the employer as discrimination?
Potentially. There's a whole bunch of different issues there.
Right.
In this particular instance, they were in a profession where it was a requirement of the job, and it was a statutory requirement of the job that they have a clean background check. Okay. So potentially, if whenever someone loses a job, I don't want to get into giving employment law advice, but there are potentially instances where that could be discriminatory or not, or there may not be a legal basis for it. So absolutely, if someone thinks that there was discrimination or it wasn't right, they should contact a lawyer and have them look at the situation.
Okay, great, thank you.
So the ideal part of it is, so let's say you do get your records expunged or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's not like, whew, it's done, it's over with, now they're not gonna, now I'll be able to have access to housing and possibly get that dream job that I'm qualified for, because chances are they may still, depending on whatever company or whatever goes through for their background check, it may still pop up depending on...
It's not a magic bullet, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of the ideal situation is you have someone who has one offense, and that's it, and they get it expunged, and from that point on, provided they're looking for housing and the housing records are getting, the background checks are getting run after the expungement has been done and gone through, ideally they should be okay. That doesn't always happen. And it really is happening when companies have out-of-date records that they're drawing their information from. And if there's enough complaints and enough lawsuits, those companies will get in line and make sure that they're using current information.
Okay. I actually have one more.
Sure,
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So let's say you have a couple things that you want expunged from your record. Do you have to fill out a petition for each one?
Oh, wonderful question.
Is it all together? Is it
wonderful
all for
question.
One?
Technically, right now, if someone has multiple offenses, they are supposed to do a single petition for each offense.
And pay the fee.
And pay the fee for each one. If that has not always been enforced, that's where working with a self-help center can really be helpful, because there's a self-help center in every county. And they will be able to give you a sense of, you've got 3 offenses. Technically, you should be doing a petition for each one, but I think we'll be able to group them all on one petition. And this is especially the case if a person has a fee waiver. The court's not going to want to process a fee waiver for every single petition. So if you can group them together, that's great. So technically, yes, every file that's going to be sealed, every file with a petition has to have its own petition and filing fee. You may be able to work around that.
Some of your records may be expunged. Some may say, no, we will expunge this one, but we're going to keep
Absolutely,
this one open.
yeah. If someone has a whole laundry list of stuff, maybe they'll get some of it sealed. Maybe they'll get all of it. Right now, you do have to go back to the county where the record is. So it's not unusual to have people going to Hennepin County and Ramsey County. It's really a pain if they live in Hennepin County and they've got a case, say, in Otter Tail County. Sometimes my client who had the check forgery case, she was actually living out of state, and we made arrangements for her to appear by phone. So that may be an option that you can explore. So right now is the way, so far as we know, that you do need to go back to the county where the record is to get it sealed. So the different resources that are out there, if someone is going to represent themselves, absolutely, they can go to the self-help centers. Hennepin County has an excellent setup. William Mitchell has a pro se clinic during the semester where people can come in and get the forms and work with law students that are supervised by attorneys to fill those in. The Council on Crime and Justice does clinics with the Volunteer Lawyers Network, and the Volunteer Lawyers Network does a lot of different clinics. So they do them at different community locations and in the courthouses. So there's a lot of different options there. And they have a clinic as well where people can sit down with attorneys and fill in the papers. There's community organizations and legal aid that may offer representation. That's done on financial eligibility, and a person can work with a private attorney. So there's different options out there. I absolutely recommend at some point to have for people who are thinking about expungement, to sit down with an attorney and just look at their situation and whether an expungement is a realistic and reasonable option for them, or whether they're just going to waste their time. It's a lot of work, and I hate seeing people go through all of that work and get to court and find out that they really never had a really good chance of getting their stuff sealed. And that's really what I want people to avoid. So check in with an attorney at some point along the way.
Okay, well, that is going to end our session on criminal expungements. Andrea has done a great job, and you guys, oh my goodness, great questions. So
wonderful questions.
So for our audiences at home and at the laptop, this is Ellie Krug saying thank you for your attention on this training video. Please recall that Call for Justice is a nonprofit organization based out of Minneapolis. We are the recipient of the 2015 Lewis M. Brown Award for Access to Justice by the American Bar Association. We do accept donations and contributions. We are, as I said, nonprofit. And you make a donation to us, and we will give you a tax-deductible acknowledgement. And as well, we will make you a friend of justice. You get your own very personalized certificate with your own personalized friend number. So until next time, our next training sessions will be in March of 2015 with a topic yet to be determined. Thank you very much for being with us today.